Hello. Hi, everyone. Welcome. We're happy to have you here today. Myself and Renato joining for our webinar discussing how practice becomes policy and how we've seen this again and again in our industry. So I'd like to just introduce Renato, who's one of the sharpest observers of how this industry evolves. He's co-founder of Nimdzi and a longtime industry analyst. So welcome, Renato. Very interested in hearing your thoughts on this topic today.
Thank you, David. This is a great topic and very timely. I'm very happy to be here and have this conversation with you.
Thank you so much. And myself, I'm David Paré. I'm the general manager of life sciences here at Smartling, and I've been in the industry for 25 years. I came from the actual traditional side of the industry, recently moved over to the tech first side of our industry, and this is an interesting topic in a lot of reasons. Number one, it's very timely, and we're seeing very fast-flowing development of technology. And par for the course, litigation, the law has not caught up with the requirements of our industry, especially because translation is a front runner in the utilization of AI. We've been using a lot of different variations for years, but now, with this latest advancement, we're seeing huge changes at a rapid pace in our industry. So one example I can give before we get into the actual topics is that how we had seatbelt laws evolve. So 1959, just for time relevance, Nils Bohlin from Volvo, a Swedish engineer, develops a 3-point safety belt. It was great. And it saved a lot of lives. And there was a lot of data to say this was an important development in automotive safety. It took till 1984 for a law to take place to say everyone must use a seatbelt. In translation, for comparison, in 2000, you had an executive order, Executive Order 13166, that said if you receive federal funding as a provider, you had to provide meaningful access for LEP members, so limited English proficiency members. That law happened 10 years later. So we're getting faster. So it was 25 years. Now it's 10 years for language development of law around who should receive the content in language. And I think the principle applies. So we're looking at the law and government regulations catching up with how fast technology is moving and how fast these advancements are happening. So I want to stop right there, and I just want to hand over to Ronaldo and ask just overall, your overarching perception on what you've been seeing for decades in the industry. And when you look at where AI and healthcare translation sits right now, what are you hearing? What are you seeing? What's the mood amongst the different providers you work with?
Well, one of the characteristics of the language industry, David, is that we're more reactive than proactive. This is an industry that is driven mostly by fear. This whole conversation about regulation and things like that, and this is not specific to the language industry as a whole, but it's particularly prevalent in the healthcare and life sciences space, because there is this involvement with human life and health and risk, right? But traditionally, our industry, starting from the premise that practice becomes policy, and also taking the famous practice makes perfect idea, we tend to slowly adopt technologies and changes that are widespread in other segments and bring them to the healthcare space over time. Aligning with the example that you gave with seatbelts, let's just look at machine translation. Machine translation has been around since the 1950s. It has really advanced a lot in the early 2000s with the statistical machine translation, when we moved from rules-based to statistical. And then in 2016, Google Translate came out with neuro machine translation that revolutionized the way and the use of translation. And now we're coming into the AI phase. And if we look at this process, at the beginning of machine translation, for a long, long time, the attitude of the industry was resistance. It's not reliable. We cannot use this stuff. With statistical machine translation, it took about 4 or 5 years for people to start looking at it. In 2017, there was the first ISO standard, ISO 18587. It's too many numbers. 18587 that normalized machine translation post-editing. And this was the first official way of codifying it. So if we look at the beginning of machine translation in 1954 to 2017, you have over 50 years to deploy and recognize that machine translation was already a reality. So, but the problem with standards and ISO and things like that is that they first of all, they are designed by consensus. They're not designed by best practice. They are designed in committees where you have a mix of levels of expertise and interested parties that participate as volunteers, and they are international. So you might have 50 countries involved in these conversations, and the discussions tend to be very slow. let's use a good adjective here. Slow, but the most important thing is that my reaction when the first ISO standards came out, we were already running advanced workflows. We already had translation management systems. We already had translation memories and so on. But the way the first 15038 standard for translation came out, for me, it felt like, I used to say in a very facetious way, that it codified how we did translations in 1953. Is it as if we hadn't advanced anything? We still had this concept of the more eyes you put into the revision and review process, the better it will become, ignoring the fact that who is reviewing makes a difference, ignoring the fact that sometimes reviewers incorporate errors instead of removing them. So there are many constraints that are not considered, and there is a focus on the process and not on the outcome. So this is a risk that we run into, we risk running into with this new phase of AI in translation.
Yeah, and one of the things I remember is training for an editor to read a machine translation output, right? So it had special nuances that they had to look out for. So that training was very specific to that particular area. And I'm seeing things in AI that, you know, in LQE, and we'll get into that, as far as systems and how we can deal with some of these things, because it is becoming a technology over a service, right? So the service is going to mitigate what the technology does. But I did see this firsthand, you know, earlier on in my career, looking at the default practice, like MTPE going from experimental to, you know, a standard, and MTPE being
yes.
Yeah, so it's like a mainstay, and a lot of different organizations had a best practice, looked at training their editors, looked at solidifying a process, even after, you know, 18587 was out. So you saw like furtherance of the you know, securing the process and making sure the quality was there. But ultimately, it's about quality, right? So you're going to mitigate issues that happen, and security, obviously, with AI. So one of the big things that we'll see is that the real question is, you know, what practices do we want to become a policy, right? So if the system is going to do like an LQE, right, linguistic quality estimation in the system, that should be a set standard. And we're going to see a lot more of those types of factors come into play, right? That criteria, what components we see. But, you know, overall, when you look back, you know, 30 years ago, what were we doing? I know you call it the slingshot effect, and it's very important to see where we were and where we're going to go. So some relative comparisons might be helpful just to kind of set the frame as we look at what we're looking to see in an AI component.
Yeah. This concept of the slingshot effect is very it's a tool in the futurists' toolbox, right? And the idea is that in order for you to be able to predict the future, you need to, using a slingshot, you go back in past, look how things were, what took you to where we are, and how things might evolve going into the future. And when we look at what we were doing 30 years back, and a little parenthesis here, the 15, I always mix up the numbers. It's not the 38.
18587, that one.
18587. 18587 came out in 2017. So it was already dealing with statistical machine translation when neuro machine translation was just starting, right? The advances that we had from 2016 when Google Neuro Translation came for a few languages until 2023 when ChatGPT came out were amazing. And what neuro machine translation brought into the picture was this concept that we didn't have the language to describe, but people would usually say that neuro-machine translation was fluent, but not necessarily accurate, right? We have a word for that. We have vocabulary for that today. We call it a hallucination in generative AI. And it's less prevalent in translation than it is in other areas and other actions that AI has. But we were early adopters of this technology. Neuro-machine translation was an early form of generative AI. And
right.
When we look at, and this is just 3.5 years ago, and neuro-machine translation is 10 years ago. So we already have a major transformation in this period, and regulations have not been able to catch up with it. We're dealing with regulations that are already, they were born outdated in a certain way. So right. We have criteria, we create proxies, and we describe the problem with a policy and regulation is that it focuses on the how we do things. What is a process? What are the steps that we need to follow to achieve a certain result? And if I hope all of you who are listening to us have watched the most watched TED Talk, the classic Simon Sinek talk, when he talks about the 3 circles and he says, start with the why. This is the kind of conversation that we need to move to, is starting with why are we translating this content? What is the goal? What is the ultimate objective? And not so much how we do things. How do we do things is a consequence, not the purpose. So if we are able to change and move the conversation away from the easy conversation, which is, oh, we do this because it's cheaper, we're doing this because it's faster, we're doing this because everybody else is doing. If we start looking at it, what is the actual value of what we're delivering? We're delivering patient results. We're delivering healthy individuals. We're delivering less, a reduction in readmittance because of poor communication. There are metrics that are much more relevant that determine why we use technology, and instead of the easy to measure cost, time, and quality, right?
I've had so many conversations recently that brought me into the why. The main one, I think, was Rob Goodwin. He's now at Parexel, but he said time is life, right? Not time is money, but time is life. So when it comes to patients, communication is care. So when you're communicating in language and it's accurate, It's timely. Everything is comprehensive in the communication. It helps the patient's experience. So time is life is one of the main things I heard again and again, by others in different ways, right? To communicate and to make sure that they're communicating in such a way that the client feels cared for, heard, understood. And that's the main why for us in our group, healthcare communications, to have things in hand most accurately, quick as possible. And then secondarily, there's a burden of cost, right? And that translates right through to the member, the healthcare, the patient.
Yeah.
If we can reduce those costs in the top line, that does pan out for them as well. So, there's a responsibility and accountability for us in the industry to utilize these processes really responsibly, and putting all those set standards in place early on. Having a very strong system that's taking advantage of all these technologies and administering that care in a more quick, better, more efficient, effective way. It's incumbent upon us. I really feel like that's part of it. So when I see the difference in these types of regulations, and the approaches, it's very interesting. The shift from services plus technology in the traditional side, where we had ISO standards that were largely set. And like you're saying, the more bodies, the more eyes on it, the higher the quality, those set standards. And now we're looking at technology plus services, and that technology is getting more and more powerful by the day. So we need a compliant system that adheres to translation standards and increases the quality, not reduces the quality through that transition from services plus technology to technology plus services. I think that's
the point that you bring about time is life is a brilliant turn of words. The important thing when in healthcare, there are, let's call it, moments of truth. There are moments where communication is important, it's relevant, but it's more importantly timely, right? Early in the interaction, you have the whole healthcare client, let's put it this way, subscriber, patient, however we want to call it, relationship, which is a transactional relationship. It's registration, it's membership information, it's coverage, it's pharmacy, and so on. And these are day-to-day conversations that might have some leeway and some time for you to respond. They follow a certain calendar time. There is a open enrollment communication time, but there is also a workflow that is with the patient and the caregiver, right? So it's the moment of making an appointment. That conversation is between a patient and a nurse or a receptionist or somebody that is in the hospital system. And that has a certain level of, how do you say, timeliness that is important, but there is also an element, it's more of a less technical communication, let's put it this way. Then you have the actual interaction between the doctor and the patient, and this is where interpretation comes into place, where other types of communication come into place. Then there is the hospital experience, which is a completely different situation. And a very, very important and timely situation is the dismissal of the patient from a treatment, from a hospital stay. And at that moment, information is actually critical, because you're not going to give a patient a prescription with instructions and things like that 3 days after they leave the hospital. It needs to be in time. So the experience, the journey of the patient in the relationship with the players in the healthcare system, especially in the United States, has different levels of communication, different levels of relevance and risk, and we tend to treat them all the same. And I think that one of the things that you have brought up a couple of times, and we haven't really dwelled much on it, is the shift in the supply side. Traditionally, the language industry has been dominated by language service providers who integrate technology into their solutions according to the needs of the client, the situation, and it's very ad hoc.
Right.
And I think that something that has happened over the last decade and accelerated now with AI is that institutions, organizations are more looking first where translation has become something that is driven by the CTO and the CIO because it's an information workflow, than by the communications people, by the documentation people. Technology takes a different role and becomes consumed inside a platform, right? So what we see in the market is that there is the conversation starts at the technology level, and then the services need to comply with those integrations, communication and workflows that speak to each other inside a certain platform. And this is a change significant because now AI doesn't come from a subscription to ChatGPT. It comes through this funnel of a platform that provides the AI solution together with the machine translation solution, together with the translation memory and the ISO standard compliance and so on. And this is a significant shift, I think, David.
Yeah, you're not buying services wrapped in technology, you're buying technology augmented by services. And I think that shift is fundamental. And I think organizations, to your point, we're seeing requests and conversations start at a very different level than they had before. And that's across the board. I think 95% of the initial conversations are coming through a CTO, and in that way. So, what we see at Smartling is a lot of it. It's one system, right? So it's different. So when you're an LSP, you apply systems and you add systems along the way. That's more challenging, especially in this world of technology, to kind of piecemeal the systems together. And we're going to talk about compliance in a minute, and that's the other part of it. So you have the tech side and you have the security side, right? It's opening the door in different ways compared to the old traditional processes. So if you could take a step back and say, we know what 30 years ago looks like. What does 30 years from now look like for you from a patient experience? Is there any vision that you see, happening where our industry has changed to the point where, it's a perfect world scenario for patients and members to receive, material and language? Do you have any vision you could share in that way?
Look, one of the things that I've tried over the years, because Jaap van der Meer, who's a visionary, is the CEO of Taos. 25 years ago, he used to say that translation would be like electricity. It would be a commodity coming out of the wall. That's how he used to present it. And I think that that's a reality today. It's embedded everywhere. You don't think of a translator as an individual first. I've talked to young people, and they think translation as a feature more than anything. It's like a spell checker. In the past, we used to buy a spell checker and install it, and it worked with a specific text editor. And now it's everywhere. You have Grammarly and you have spell checkers. You can't making a typo is almost impossible these days. It's everywhere, right?
Right.
And
right.
I think that as we look forward, like everything, this is going to become transparent and invisible, but there needs to be an engine behind it, right? Like every technology, you reach a level of complexity at some level that what is going to change is the role of the people working in the process. I think that I'm not a physicist, but if I remember correctly, the universe tends to entropy, right? The chaos is the standard, and we're always trying to organize chaos. And this is the reality with organizations. Complexity grows. There are more requirements. We're talking about regulations for translation, but there's going to be more and more regulations for the way healthcare is delivered. There's going to be more access, more people having access to healthcare. I think it's a natural development. The United States is way behind in coverage compared to most advanced countries in the G7, even in the G20. So the infrastructure is going to become more complex, and it's going to require more specialized language and translation. And language is going to evolve because language is changing, and it needs constantly to be updated. And the role of the translation function is going to be everywhere, like Grammarly is everywhere, like a spell checker is everywhere. But it needs to be curated, it needs to be managed, it needs to be compliant, it needs to be accurate, and it's an evolving beast. One of the things that, just to wrap this comment around it, a few years ago at Nimdzi, we published what we call the Language Technology Radar, where we track about 1,000 technologies, and I identified we had a poster, and I counted that we had 87 machine translation solutions in our radar. And when you have 87 solutions, you create a problem. You create a problem of choice. And the classic paradox of choice is the more choice you have, the harder it becomes to make a decision. And you need somebody who's an expert to make a choice. And I mentioned at the time that in the future we would have a machine translation sommelier. I think that AI, we're in the same position right now. In the mind of people, AI is generative AI, and it's ChatGPT. For 90% of the people in the world, ChatGPT is AI. But it's not. You have hundreds of LLMs. You have thousands of applications that are developed using those, or tens of thousands, maybe hundreds of thousands of applications developed based on this variety of LLMs. And you need somebody to help you define which is the one that will work correctly for your specific need. And this is where the expert platforms take shape. This is where a solution like Smartling, where you can choose, okay, my company uses Anthropic, my company uses Gemini, the other company uses OpenAI. Which one am I going to use? It doesn't matter. They fit inside the platform.
Yeah, there's two really important points there. One is the human in the loop. So that's your specialist. And there's a human in the loop also on the tech choice side, right?
Yeah.
So systems, like you raised the point, Smartling, they have an auto select. So based on the content that someone's entering into a system, it should be able to say this LLM is going to be more responsive to that content than this one. So there's a personal aspect, a human aspect in saying I have the linguist to check this, right, and to sample that content and make sure this LQE, this auto select is directing the content to the right LLM, and then down the line you'll have a specialist linguist to finalize the content, to stay in compliance, right?
The role of the linguist or the expert, maybe it's going to be called the translator, I don't know, impersonator, or whatever name we want to give to the function, is moving away from looking at words, typing words, and working on units to mitigating risk. The role of humans in complex processes is to make sure that the trains run on time, that the deliverables are correct, that problems are flagged, that challenges are resolved. And the role of the human is not going to be, it's not already, it's the case of machine translation post-editing. It's not just to read every single word, but to make sure that the context and the rules are followed, and the consistency is maintained, and the vocabulary is correct, and things like that. But this can be done with agents today. This can be done with other technologies on top. And maybe the human in the loop, the role can be the role of coordinator. I'm making gestures here. It reminds me of Tom Cruise in that movie where he's shuffling the files up and down. It's pretty much what could be the situation, the role of the human in the loop then, right? The Minority Report was the name of that.
That's the one. That's the one. Yeah, I remember that. One of the things that we didn't talk about before we move on to the next kind of topic I want to discuss was how developed, different organizations' content is becoming. So you have the LLM, but that's only after they've gone through their initial, digital assets, their linguistic assets. So you have TMs that are being built, right? Either by human review, really valuable content that they have online. So the system should look at that first, and then have an LLM check it, and then to look at, other translation that could be augmented or smoothed the translation, like you said before. The machine translation read more fluently with NMT, right? Neural machine translation. Now, the LLMs are performing that function, right? They're also building the asset. So their base asset, which is gold, right? This is, approved terminology, is growing as we speak, right? Through this technology. So they're becoming more and more repurposed. Like you have a lot of more approved content in your stack, right? So when you draw from that, that's going to give you the speed that we're looking for, the accuracy, the brand voice, everything that comes along with having that quality built into the system. So it's a virtuous cycle that the technology is helping you build your assets at the same time. So just the original question I asked you, that perfect state, I think there's a generative thing happening that's on the safe side, not on the hallucination side, but on the safe side.
Yes.
Yeah, that's growing very quickly, and that's going to give a lot more instant translation availability to these large organizations.
And by the way, we need to also recognize that we have an underlying assumption. It's like, and we always have this underlying assumption that there is an end state to technology advancement, right? Generative AI is one step in a process, and there's going to be a new technology. People are talking about AGI, but I wouldn't be surprised if at some point in this development, we find something completely different, and AI came into our lives 3.5 years ago. Nobody was expecting it. It's like slap in your face. Oh my God, look that way. And there might be something else coming, and where these things and these conversations and all this preparation that we're having might become moot. But I think that the importance, the thing that we need to be aware is that the role of the service that we provide through a platform or just pure service is to remove risk. And this is why we talk about policies. This is why we talk about protections and systems in place to guarantee privacy, compliance, preservation of life, and improvements in the care, right? These are real goals, and the translation is just a vehicle to transmit those goals. And I think that if going back to that vision of the 2056, healthcare will be completely different. The diseases are going to be different. I don't know. I might be going to a doctor or a provider to adjust the software on my knee, or I don't know, my prosthetic knee. We can make up a ton of things. I love a quote from a book called the Visionary's Handbook, and at the beginning of the book, the author says, "If the future that you describe seems plausible, you're just describing the present. If it seems totally absurd, you're probably wrong. So it's speculation at the end of the day.
What I look at right now is there's this, areas like in healthcare, like member communications, where there's so much content that's the same as was in the previous go round, that you can automate nearly all of the process, right? And the important factor is keeping the KPIs for quality the same. So you have, all your ISO standards, all of your quality metrics, they don't change, right? But you do all of the safe stuff, like automating all the steps of the process that you can. And then with that small amount of translation acceleration through an LLM, you amplify the process and you grow this content, right?
But it's not only the content, David, it's even the format, right? We could talk about, I don't know, grievance letters and explanation of benefits. These are very, very, very standard, repetitive processes that took a lot of time and cost a lot of money because of the way they existed. And with AI, I don't know, what's your experience with that kind of stuff? I'm sure you're handling this at Smartling every day.
Yeah, I always look back and look forward. So I remember literally paper proofs being looked at by linguists, and they were checking, version against version. Everything is automated on the system. So I literally had to move from a traditional, process to a company that would lead with AI, so that I could bring these kind of, qualities, these features and benefits, like, to the market in a more fulfilled way. So looking at 90%, 95% repetitive content, there's no reason for any individual proofing. All you have pre-authorized content in the system. You picture a color-coded interface for a linguist where everything is green except for the changes between two plans, right? And you have two certified documents. So if you look at AEP, annual enrollment period, when there's hundreds of these documents going through, that used to be a pressure cooker. People would have, I would say 10 to 12-hour days on a regular basis. Now it's more manageable. Now you have something where, it's on one system, it's unified, content is going through, there's no need for version control. They can drag and drop an updated proof in without having to highlight changes. The system detects all of that now. So you do have a future state now, and it has to be in a, no give and take on quality. The quality is non-negotiable. You're going to keep that quality.
Something as simple as reading PDFs, which was a big challenge, and today the system handles that. But you need to have controls, because you need to mask PII, personal information. You need to comply with GDPR if you're dealing with Europe. You need to comply with MDR if you're dealing with medical devices. And if you design the system correctly, all these things become process steps in a workflow. They do not have to, which is counterintuitive, because a lot of the mistakes and errors that generated corrective actions, corrective action, CAPA, right? Well, a lot of them were human errors that had nothing to do with the translation, but they had to do with human misinterpretation of instructions, or somebody that didn't do the right conversion to a PDF, or problems that were manual problems that were not related to language, right?
Right. Hey, that's the key. I think the introduction of AI just has this one other component that I think we should really start digging into. It's the compliance and security aspects. Because now AI systems, there are 5 tenets that I look at when I say what's a compliance system. So zero retention of an AI and LLM of content, training opt-outs. Personal health information, no information of a company goes out to the public domain. Automated PII removal, so masking in the system so that it doesn't travel into any system and bring any risks out that wouldn't have existed in the previous kind of manual world. And then transparency, right? So the system has to be completely transparent. So an auditor, someone looking at a CAPA, like you're saying, if there were an error, the system has to have that system of record for everything, one single source of truth. When you have that, you have the beginnings of a verifiable, auditable system, right? And the last two is like a risk-based human in the loop. So there's content that can go through the system without risk, undoubtedly. I have some public companies that are just using, machine translation, at large, at scale, and their content is more public-facing, so they don't have these issues. But in healthcare, it has to be really mitigated. So looking at linguists operating in a system that has a completely validated, compliant system, only looking at new content, not extraneous work being done. So it's very targeted, right? So the system, when you do the audit trail and when you do look at what's being translated in the system, you're not introducing any unnecessary risk. That's the key. And then the last thing is data residency. So people they don't want their material going out in the public domain, but it has to be in one locale, one area. So those are the 5 key tenets I see. So, when you have a clear human accountability, right? Like you're saying, I think the comparison you made was someone checking the time on a train coming into the station. Everything's automated beforehand, and you have to have this stopgap that has a sense check or a checkpoint. So we still have our quality teams. But now the AI component in all our security teams are looking at all of those areas for compliance. So those are the 5 best practices I see in a system right now, before any ruling comes out. And I'm interested in what you think of the approach of the US government for AI validation versus the EU and their EU Act, the AI Act, right? So I think you have 2 different ways of looking at this. So as we wait for these regulations to become law in the US, what's becoming law in the EU, those systems have to have that best practice built in before it happens. And I think to the title of our meeting today, the practice will become the policy.
Well, usually what happens, if we exclude the lobbyists and the special interests and the which we're not a part of, the language industry is not part of those conversations. Usually what legislation codifies, like we said, same thing as standards, codifies the past, right? The United States has been resisting legislating too much around AI, and in a way, it's allowing the many wrong things to happen because we're still early in the process. And the European approach is let's control the process. Let's determine how growth, how development is going to happen, and what are the constraints that we need to have around that. The interesting thing in the United States is that early on, the leaders of the AI companies were begging the government to regulate, and that regulation didn't come. I don't think with the current environment in the United States, we're going to get any significant regulation coming from the United States, but other markets that have strong regulatory frameworks for life sciences in general and healthcare. Europe and Brazil is a good example. Turkey seems to be leading the way in that space also. Are markets that we will need to look at what they're taking into consideration to move forward, right? But an important point that we need to keep in mind is that the language industry doesn't create anything. We transform. We work on other people's work, other functions' work. So our regulations and constraints tend to reflect process, not policy. We in the language industry, whatever is related to language is more about the how and not so much about the why. This is more of a sales problem. I think that the opportunity, what we're going to see is that we need to align with whatever AI compliance or requirements are coming from the industry itself, and we need to align with them. So what we do in the language industry in general, we align with HIPAA, we align with HITRUST, we align with all these requirements that come from the healthcare industry and not from ourselves, right? But we're followers, we're not leaders in this space.
Yeah, but we do lead in one way. You know, what I said earlier about keeping up with KPIs and making sure security protocols are followed. The best practices that we form right now to make sure that we adhere to all the standards and mitigate risk for our clients, right? To really shrink the opportunity for any mishap, anything happening as much as possible, you know, by a solid practice, I think is the key for us. And that's our mandate. Our mandate is to, you know, make sure we're on the safe side of all of that, and you know, bring our clients into a best practice scenario. So when eventually these policies do get released, we're ahead of the curve for them. But yeah, I think we should kind of wrap and start looking at some Q&A at this point and see how everyone has reacted to all this information that we're talking about today. So here's the first question: how do you approach training for healthcare when so much of the clinical content is HIPAA protected, i.e. the training data is not available en masse like other industries?
Well, this is part of the conversation that we were having, right? It's a challenge, but it's also an opportunity. And this is where technology advances. And I'm sure, and Dave, you have more experience than I have in this space. There is advanced technology already for masking information, but you were talking before about part of the requirement by some of these buyers of language services is that you don't use the content that you're using for training. Right. But this is where the language expertise comes into place, because you still can use terminology. You can incorporate trained terminology that is extracted from data instead of using the bulk data, which is the lazy way of doing. You can extract content, identify terminology. I don't know. How do you look at that today, especially from the Smartling side?
Yeah, it's a tiered approach. The first is, you know, having very accurate masking tools to remove any of that content upon receipt, so that if any linguist or any system, you minimize the travel of any sensitive content. And the system has got to be validated so that when it does round trip and you do use an LLM for any content that's available, it's a one-way street, right? Your content doesn't flow into the public domain. You're just extracting what's responsive from those systems and integrating it into the, you know, the TM or, you know, the actual content you're creating for those clients, and then reintroduce the PII for, you know, distribution to the client. So the ideal is to have it on one secured system, so that it's not traveling through multiple systems. That's the challenge on the traditional side. They do have multiple systems, so you'll see desktop applications, etc. So I think the key is to have one comprehensive system that's secured with that masking tool integrated into the system, and then minimizing the travel or the eyes on the content, you know, and having a validated process around that.
And by the way, Dave, I think that it's important to make a caveat here, is that sometimes we obsess about new problems and forget about things that we were doing before and that contained the same risk, right? A simple email exchange. Most email is not secure. Most email is not protected. And we are still sharing private information over email. Not all communication is secure, right? So there, I think that with the new technologies and the new fears that come, there is an opportunity to improve the protections that the systems create. And I think that with the new technologies, there's a lot of, with this new vibe coding conversation. There was a famous case of software that was leaking all the private information that people were sharing, but it was a dating site, so no healthcare information was shared.
Right.
But because the code would not naturally protect information. It's like another characteristic of this coding assistants is that they don't internationalize code. So you write code for software that doesn't take accents, doesn't take foreign characters, doesn't take other alphabets and locales, because they are biased, US biased, English biased, right? So I think that the concerns that we have with privacy and data residency and leakages and so on, they are more easily addressed with the new technologies than they were before, where everything had to be manually created and constrained.
Right. Well said. The second question here is from a translation-trained PM at a small LSP focused on life sciences. And with AI rapidly reshaping the industry, what skills or capabilities do you think will differentiate strong PMs over the next 5 years? And are there any skills you see becoming less relevant?
The less relevant skill is going to become counting words and matching segments. The most important skill, so as a project manager, you're managing 5 things, basically. You're managing budget, people, technology, time, and every time that I have to make a list, I forget one of them, and there's a 5th thing that I don't remember right now, but I'm not going to stress about it. But anyway, the most important thing now is the coordination, is what some people are calling in this industry orchestration, is the ability of making parts of a process talk with other parts of the process and make delivery transparent. And I think a key element, and we talked about this on other occasions, David, the translation by exception, right? Yeah. It's managing the exception, identifying something that is out of the loop or out of it's delayed for one reason or another, or there is some blockade in the process, electricity went down, I don't know. There is something that prevents the workflow from working regularly, and you're able to get out of that loop and solve the problem with the resources that you have. So management by exception becomes easier and a lot more relevant than just managing tasks. It's looking at the system instead of looking at the task.
What I see from the Smartling side is the volume, right? So a future skill set will have to be being more strategic in managing content as opposed to, the manual aspect. So like text extraction and document comparison and manual QCs, those things are becoming more and more easy to accomplish, right? We'll say it's automated to 95%. So I would say to this individual, it's volume control, it's organizational skills, and it's thinking more strategically. What else can I add? Because this AI is empowering people to do more, right? So higher volumes, more efficient, more effective. And it may be something to think about is just to kind of train with AI and see all the ways. Yep. All the ways.
I was going to say, Dave, I was having a conversation the other day, said that not in 2056, but maybe in 2029, 2030, you're going to go into a job interview and you're coming with your 5 agents. Say, hey, it's me and my terminology agent and my review agent and my ISO 15837 agent. Each person will build their assistants, their virtual assistants, their agents, and they're going to be working with them, and they will be part of the interview process, part of the onboarding of people. And hey, here, these are the company agents. You introduce your agents, and we're calling them agents today. Years from now, they might have another name.
Amazing. And one last question here, and this is a big futurist question, so you may like this one. in 10 years, what does the world look like where language is no longer a barrier in healthcare? And what has to be true for us to get there? I have a good answer, but I want to hear yours first.
Oh, I mean, the most important thing in a future where language is not a barrier is healthier people, longer lives, longer life expectancy, better quality of life, right? That's the outcome. This is the why that we were talking about before. But I think that what we're going to be discussing in the future is the delivery mechanism, how we're delivering that language to the stakeholder. There is communication is inherently a human experience, and people get tired of artificial content. We are getting tired already. Nobody predicted this, but we already know that it's not about, it's a classic AI formula. So you start to detect stuff that is not genuine and authentic. So right. What we're going to have to work on is authenticity. I learned many years ago in sales training that the most important thing in sales is to be authentic. Once you can fake that, you'll make your quota. I don't think you can fake authenticity, really. That's the secret. But what's your take, David?
It's my CEO, Brian Murphy. He said something that was really thought-provoking last year. He said, eventually it's going to be like Spotify. You have your subscription, right? How simple is it to access every piece of music ever created, for the most part? It's amazing, but a subscription. So I sit on these development calls every week with a group of engineers and look at the latest, developments and really pushing the envelope one piece at a time, right? To improve. And it keeps getting better and better. And I think there'll be, like you said before, nobody predicted this tidal wave of AI to hit us, right? The way it has. But it's changing us. So these little incremental differences, I think we're going to hit a threshold where there's going to be a big breakthrough. And in language is going to happen. And it may actually allow exactly his vision for like a Spotify-like subscription to simplify access for everyone, right? For language translation, high quality, ISO certified, secure. But we do it one piece at a time. So I think it's going to be a seamless experience eventually, is my point. Yeah.
Absolutely. And each person is going to have their own. The difference for us in this business is that each individual needs one language, but we need to address all their languages. So right. It's and we want them to have all the same experience. I'm more concerned about African languages, languages of lesser adoption, that they need to have the same experience that a French speaker, an Italian, or a Spanish speaker. And this is, I think it's a good vision for the future.
Right. Wow. Renato, this has been amazing. Thank you so much for sharing all your insights. Super valuable. And I hope you enjoyed this discussion as much as I have. I think if we go deeper, you want to join us at our Global Ready conference. Our annual conference is upcoming. The whole community of localization comes together to learn from leaders like yourself and really shape the future of global content. I'll drop a link for to register in the chat. And again, thank you so much. It's been just remarkable speaking with you. I can't wait to see what comes next.
The best sign that this was good is that I didn't even realize that we spent an hour talking. This was very, very good conversation. We can do it again anytime.
Absolutely. Well, thank you so much. And thanks everyone for joining today. Take care.